Sorry?
These are not up to date.
Okay. I pulled them to like about 30 minutes ago. Did they change since then?
Let's see, 6, 7. What is forecasting? I'm having trouble actually. Okay. So I can just click the share button on each one and it shows up. Yeah, this is not up to date.
Okay, let me go into the slides and then I'll re-upload. Do you want to go backstage? We'll click leave stage and then I'll re-upload them.
Yeah, and it looks like I put a slide in for speakers, but you've already got one for speakers. So do I need to ditch mine that has speakers? Or I guess I can just skip it,
fine. Yeah, I think that's fine. Let's leave stage real quick in case people are coming on.
Okay.
Good afternoon. We want to give folks about 2 minutes to join. So of course I'm gonna surprise us with an icebreaker, Taft and Brad, because what's better than a little improv on a good afternoon. So let's do your favorite place to eat lunch. I know mine is an absurd name called Nacho Macho Taco. Close by to here, and I always get something with grilled fish in it. So Taft, what's your go-to lunch place?
Oh man, I get the name of this wrong every time. There's a pizza place in Austin called Home Slice. So we don't eat it much at home. So anytime I work away from home, I sneak in an order, go pick it up, and house like a medium pizza somewhere. It's spectacular New York style pizza.
Oh, gotta love that. Especially the New York piece hits my heart.
Oh yeah.
Brad, what's your favorite go-to?
Oh, well, first I'm going to have to apologize tremendously to Taft because I ate at Home Slice on Saturday. I was actually in Austin over the weekend. Very last minute, and it was actually, believe it or not, it was not work-related. My wife's never been to Austin before, and we were up and down South Congress the whole time, stayed at the line right at South Congress and Cesar Chavez. So I'll make it back out there soon. Don't worry, and I apologize for not hitting you up. But what's funny is where our office is here in Atlanta, there's very, very few places like within walking distance, but there is one, and it's actually where I had lunch today. It is Sweetwater Brewery, which is Atlanta's, I would say, most famous brewery, of course, that everybody knows, Sweetwater 420 and all that fun stuff. So, literally had lunch there today.
Awesome. Wow, I'm hungry now. My partner made me dumplings. Now I'm like hungry again, but that's okay. Well, folks, let's get started. We're here to talk about forecasting with these awesome folks today who have some really great food opinions, in my opinion. Today's event is brought to you by the team at Modern Sales Pros. That's me. For those of you not familiar, Modern Sales Pros is the world's largest and highest quality community for those in sales management, sales leadership, sales and rev ops, and sales enablement, aka our Modern Sales Pros. And our mission is to create an environment for our members to answer questions they struggle to solve on their own and help them see around corners they might not even know are there. We do that through awesome live sessions like this, an online forum, which is huge, great content on the daily, our quarterly summits, which we just wrapped up with last week, and we're starting to get back to in-person events. Those have been really fun, and we better see you at one in the future. If you are not a part of MSP, you'll be invited to join after this event. Just a quick housekeeping note, so I can just leave backstage and you can be left with Taft and Brad and all of their brilliance here. We are recording this event. We would not let this content just float out into the world, never to be seen again. You'll have the recording shortly afterwards. And we love for our events to be very interactive. Go into that public chat and go hang out. Go talk to our panelists here. Go talk to each other, throw each other some emojis. We love to see the interaction. And if you want to use the Q&A tab, which we highly recommend because it gets a little messy sometimes, ask as many questions as you'd like. That's all from me. I'm going to go backstage and take it over, or let the lovely speakers take it over. Taft, I'm going to let you introduce yourself, and I'll see you at the end.
Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Taft Love. I'm the founder of Iceberg RevOps, and I started my career over a decade ago in law enforcement, found my way to startups, and ran some sales and operations teams along the way. And one of the problems that we couldn't solve was finding a great agency that understood the entire revenue funnel specifically for a startup. So I'll keep this to about 30 seconds, but Iceberg is an operations agency that helps growth stage companies bridge the gap that's really hard to bridge between founder selling and hiring a qualified in-house operations program. Keyword there is qualified. And so the traditional agency model just doesn't work for startups. So we call ourselves the anti-agency. So what that means is we operate more like an internal ops team than a traditional agency that does an SOW, delivers something, and starts on the next project. So we operate more like a CRO's chief of staff. And so with that, I'm going to hand it off to Brad to introduce himself.
Taft, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on. I'd be remiss if I didn't say that I can 100% validate the impact Iceberg has, especially on some of our customers. So we partner with Iceberg quite often when people need help optimizing their tech stack, truly understanding how the heck do I even set up these fields the right way to do some of the forecasting. I know we're going to get a ton into that in a little bit, but a brief background on myself. Similar to Taft, I've been in operations for a lot of my career. I did not start off as a police officer, however. That is not part of my background. But prior to starting Sonar, obviously being very focused on the RevOps world and how we help optimize go-to-market tech stacks, I was running operations for fast-paced startups, very similar to what Taft is supporting through Iceberg right now. So the pain points that him and his team are solving for align very well to my background. Got some of that scar tissue to share with it along the way. But for those that aren't familiar with Sonar, like I said, we're a change intelligence platform geared towards the operations world, helping them optimize their tech stack. So yeah, excited to be here. Thanks, Taft.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for joining. Excited to have you here. Also, Sonar is installed in every single one of our clients' orgs. It is necessary for us to do our job, and any ops team should probably take a look. So with that, let's move to the agenda. So here's what we're going to run through today, guys. What is forecasting? I know it sounds silly, but I think it's important to lay the foundation here. What are the elements of a forecast? What are some common mistakes that we at Iceberg see? And I think Brad has a lot of anecdotes here too, when it comes to forecasting specifically. And then we're gonna go through a tactical guide. We're gonna give you some real world tactical advice on how to improve forecasting. And with that, let's jump into sort of a quick call out. So I want to start with what this webinar is. So it's two things. First, it's Salesforce centric. So if you're not on Salesforce yet and you're a growing company, there's a pretty good chance you're going to end up on it. And so we're using Salesforce as a point of reference. But don't worry, if you're on HubSpot, if you're on Pipedrive, if you're using some other system, it's totally fine. These core concepts will still apply to you. It just means that some of the field names or the names of the functionality in Salesforce, you need to translate to whatever system you use. So don't leave. Even if you're on HubSpot, this matters. And then we are focusing narrowly here. So forecasting is a huge topic. I mean, as you grow, it spans different departments. Forecasting becomes a blended exercise between marketing and sales and CS and finance. We're focusing on sales forecasting specifically here. So we're not going to talk about how sales works with finance to do certain types of forecasting. We're not going to talk about compensation strategy as relates to forecasting. Focus is really important, so that's what we're doing here. So let's jump into it. What is forecasting? So sales forecasting is a method of estimating how much money is coming in. It's that simple. How much money do we think we're going to make from the pipeline we have? So for most teams, this means a combination of qualitative and quantitative. So we're using data points to understand how much money we think we're going to make.
Plain and simple in its purest form. The one thing that I always like to tell folks, especially in forecasting, and especially if you're just starting off figuring out how to forecast, it is very much a mix of art and science. But be very grounded with yourself that where you start right now in your forecasting journey is going to evolve, and that's totally fine. It's expected. Your company's going to evolve. How you measure yourself is going to evolve. But keep that in mind. Don't be afraid to still hit go on some of this. You'll learn your way through it. You might get a little bit of scar tissue along the way. You might stub your toe every once in a while. But it's important to get it out there and get it moving. As a business owner, I can tell you the number of times I get asked about our forecast, even on a weekly basis, I probably don't have enough fingers and toes to count. And that's just how important it is to the world that we all live in and the fast-paced environment that we're in.
Totally agree. So another thing to sort of talk about here is we're talking about bottoms-up forecasting. Like I said before, forecasting can be a big topic. So bottoms up, we're talking about using reps inputs into our system to understand from the bottom up to the management level how much revenue we anticipate from pipeline. What we're not talking about here is another type of forecasting, which is top-down forecasting. So if you're building territories, if you're thinking about comp, if you're doing some sort of forward-looking planning, you might be doing top-down forecasting. It's not what we're talking about. So everything you hear from here on out, remember, this is bottoms up from the rep level up to the VP, CRO, CEO. So keep that in mind as we go. Two different types of forecasting.
Absolutely. I think the one thing to call out there too, and I think it's very relevant probably to our audience. Bottoms up, you are going to be very tactical about this. You are going to know so much of your business process, how much hands-on that you're actually going to have to do with your team. The reason I call that out, that is going to be very pertinent to the RevOps folks that are here on this call, the Salesforce admins, the business operations managers. That top-down that you're talking about has its spot in the place of business. A lot of times it's very much owned by finance. So you're going to be very finance, like your director of finance, your VP of finance, your CFO is going to work on more of that financial modeling. So you're spot on with that.
So let's jump into what are the elements of a forecast. And I intentionally made this really simple because I want to really drive home that at its core, forecasting is simple. There are 3 elements of a forecast and only 3. Probability. How likely is this deal to be won? Value. What is it worth if it is won? And timing. When do we think we're going to win it? If you nail those 3 things, you have a crystal ball. If you can nail those 3 things consistently, you will forecast well. And so as we go through this, I want you to remember, it is really easy to sort of go down rabbit holes and stray from this foundational concept. But remember, you get these 3 things right, you win forecasting.
Couldn't agree more. And again, if you're early in this journey, we said this a second ago, but keep it simple. We talk about it often. Keep it simple, stupid, right? Like KISS methodology. But Taff, you're spot on. And tactically speaking, when we think about these 3 components and the 3 elements of it, those also break down typically into 3 very, very specific fields. I know we'll get more into the tactical side of that. It's very easy to go broad, and to have many more fields that go into it. But again, start making sure that you can actually try to see the forest through the trees. They'll be the antithesis of that. But yeah, keep it simple.
That's exactly right. And you're spot on, Brad. So 3 fields should speak to these 3 elements. And a lot of companies make this unnecessarily complex. And as you know, Brad said, as we were preparing for this, like this stuff's gonna get more complex as you grow. You don't have to make it complex early. So focus on keeping this simple. So choose a North Star metric and make that your value. If you're able to, use the amount field. That's wired into so many features in Salesforce that you can skip a lot of automation and calculation by just using the amount field out of the box. And you can update the amount field with automations in Salesforce. So there are a lot of ways to use that amount field, even if reps aren't putting numbers directly in it. And then probability, I want to really lean on this for a minute because the most common issue I see is leaders conflating the concept of sales stage and forecast category. Those are 2 different things. The sales stage tells you where tactically in a deal the buyer is in their journey. And the forecast category is how likely this deal is to come in. And the reason these so often get conflated and are rarely properly divorced is because Salesforce ties the 2 together. You associate stages with forecast category. You must train your reps to change the forecast category as is appropriate. It is totally possible for a deal to be in a late stage that's called negotiate and be omitted from pipeline, because we know they're also considering this other competitor who, for their specific use case, is a better fit, and they're probably going to go with them. Or a member of a competitor's board is also one of the decision makers, and there is a snowball's chance in hell of us winning this deal. We're negotiating, but I don't believe it's coming in. So remember, these two concepts have to be divorced. Separate them. Force yourself to think about them differently. If you start thinking of sales stage as probability, forecasting is going to get much, much harder. And then timing. This is one that Iceberg, we constantly see people mess up. And the reason for this is because people start toiling and they come up with ideas for how we can make close date more accurate, instead of forcing reps to use close date properly and having proper pipeline discussions and challenging your reps on the close dates they put in the system. I've seen a lot of clients, we have to unwind things like, well, if it's worth more than $50,000 and the close date is more than or less than 30 days away, then we artificially add 15 days to it and have an automation that updates it. And you end up with this rat's nest of complexity that is totally unnecessary if you have the discipline to focus carefully and narrowly on these three fields and make sure your reps get them right with good sales practice. And so I'll pause here for Brad.
No, I mean, I think the two things that I'm just going to key in on that, it's just so important to know, everybody's business is different. How you come up with these values should be very, very, very relative to the business you run. It might not be an overall annual agreement that you sign every time. Maybe it's the daily active users that you use, like know these kind of metrics. The reason I bring all that up at its root, especially in forecasting, you as an operations professional or a badass partner like the folks at Iceberg, you have to educate people, write it down. Here's where it gets tough, and we'll get through this in a little bit too. It can be really confusing not knowing the difference between ACV and TCV. Like, that's tough. Like, if you're new to the org, you're trying to understand the business model, having a lot of this written down and having the proper training that goes into it is going to make your forecasting job so easy, because you want to eliminate those times where, oh, I'm a rep, I'm new, I'm in my first 3 months. Oh, I didn't know on the forecast that we were actually using TCV and not ACV. Like, nope, it's probably because somebody didn't write it down the right way and didn't train you properly on it. So be empathetic towards that as well as an ops person, and not necessarily like the best salesperson in the world. I have to be empathetic to the sellers that we talk with all the time of, yeah, tell me more about MedPick and the different strategies you're using, objection handling. You have to learn that as an ops person the same way they on the sales team or anybody that's responsible for forecasting has to learn the mechanics of how you calculate this stuff. So empathy goes a long way with trying to understand forecasting for your team.
100% agree. And this next slide, I'm going to spend just a second on it and hand it over to Brad, because Iceberg is bootstrapped, doesn't answer to a board, and has a lot less writing on forecasts than Brad has for years. But the bottom line is, it's simple. To run a business well and to run it on anything other than gut feel, you need some numbers you trust to understand your growth, so that you can spend appropriately, so that you can hire appropriately, so that you can set expectations with your investors. And so I'm going to pause here, Brad. I want to hear your experience with why this matters.
Well, I can tell you one of the reasons why we have it right here is, and this is probably true for a lot of folks, you learn better from your mistakes than your successes. But I think we've all been in one of these scenarios before, whether it be at your current company. We don't have this problem here because of some of the lessons we've learned, but it's the ultimate boardroom story, right? You get done with a quarter. Everybody feels like we won, like you actually had a great quarter. Productivity wise, like you actually hit your number, you did fine. But when you go to discuss that, here's where it gets tough. You start at the top of the funnel. Marketing, you go first. How did we go hit this number? Oh man, it was easy. Last quarter, we brought in 5 million of new pipeline. We hit our goal. Yay. Bounce past that down to the sales leader. And she's like, okay, cool. I didn't see 5 million in pipeline come over to my side of the fence. I actually saw like 3 million, but that's okay. That's okay. We hit our goal of closing 2 million in revenue. It's like, cool. Bounce past that down to the CS leader. And she jumps in and she's like, I didn't onboard $2 million worth of new customers yet. I only saw like 1.5 come in, and wait. Why do we have all this? And then by the end of that, you look down at the very end of that table or across the Zoom meeting, and 2 investors have their hands in their face like this, and the CFO's like just scratching their head, like, what are we doing here? So much of that is rooted, again, back in three very specific components or elements, like what Taft was saying. But how you calculate those, how they transfer one group to another is so important. And if everybody's not on the same page about how to calculate it, how to forecast it correctly, and how to interpret it, you're going to wind up with egg on your face. I've seen it happen. Like I said, that is a true story from previous worlds that I've been in. And it's not fun looking silly in front of your boss's 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 boss and the person that's cutting $1 million checks into your company. So it matters. And again, it boils down tactically to those 3 components that Taft said a second ago.
100% agree. So let's talk about what does it require to get this right? Those 3 elements aside, which are the foundation of good forecasting, but how do you make those 3 things consistently trustworthy? So the first is consistency. Brad just touched on this. Shared definitions throughout your sales and marketing funnel. Do you mean what I mean when I say revenue? Are you talking about ACV and I'm talking about MRR? Because that's a problem. The discipline, and you're going to hear the word discipline throughout this, because you cannot tech away the foundation of good forecasting. It is a human process that is, as Brad said, a mixture of science and art, and that art piece can't be coded away. And so you need discipline to keep data up to date, and as leaders, inspect what you expect. And when I say leaders, I don't just mean the VP of sales, I don't just mean the VP of ops, I mean all leadership needs to have an eye toward this. And check-ins with sales, that's the human element. You need to get a qualitative understanding of what's happening in these deals. You need quality data, and I don't mean Zoom info. You need good phone numbers. We talk so much about data in that sense, but what I'm talking about here is remembering the triangle. You need to make those 3 fields trustworthy, and you do that by keeping a close eye on them. And then a good balance between qualitative and quantitative inputs. Most teams tend to stray too far one way or the other. They focus too heavily on some new app they built that promises to tell them what their pipeline is, or they trust reps totally and ignore the counter evidence in their system that things are going well or poorly. And so you need to marry these 2.
Yeah, I agree. So much of it, we live in an age right now where technology is everywhere. And not to borrow the famous line from our friends over at Andreessen, but software is eating the world, and that's okay. That's honestly why Taft and I have great jobs is because the software component of it. But so much of this is rooted in methodology. If you don't have your methodology, again, you can't code methodology yet. You have to have a way of being about it, a mindset about it. But the one thing that we tell, especially a lot of our customers, we've seen this happen now a lot, especially using Sonar, because it can evolve so quickly, and because you can get many different fields that go into how this actually gets calculated. Source of truth, all of it. Identify those things. We have a couple of our customers, and we're doing this more and more now because we're learning so much from our customers. Go in and identify those fields. If it's ARR, tag that. We have a tagging mechanism in our software that says, like, hey, this is a KPI field, or this is a forecast field, or hey, this is part of our ELT board member field. Like, identifying that and making sure everybody's on the same page is so important. One of the best things, I know you guys at Iceberg do this often, when you're building those reports, share them as the source of truth. One thing that is sometimes hard to control in Salesforce is somebody grabs a report and sweet, make a copy, add in 15 new fields, maybe a different summary or different formula into it. That's all fine. You can allow your users to do that. But as long as you identify, hey, when we go into that forecasting meeting every Monday or at the end of the quarter, I'm hitting refresh on this report. If you want to slice and dice it in the kitchen a million different ways, go for it. But when we review it, I'm just going to let you know, this is our source of truth report. That's how we're going to make sure that we're doing everything right by the business and making the right decisions. So it can be a rabbit hole sometimes, though. It's okay that people want to make their own. If they've got a different way of looking at something, cool. Just revert them back and bring them back in and say, that's great that you have that version. Here's what we're reviewing during the board meeting or during the forecast meeting.
So we got a question from Jacob Burns here I want to address really quickly before we get too far past it. So Jacob, you asked essentially who should be the owner of the forecast category field. From where should this data be sourced? And so I'm going to share my opinion, but this is one that Brad and I might not agree on. So I want to hear what Brad thinks here too. I think this should be bottoms up, just like the rest of the forecast. So I think your reps need to be responsible for updating the forecast category, and then it's up to your managers to question that forecast category along with the other two parts of the triangle. And so I think this needs to start with the rep, be checked by the manager, and checked again by the VP of sales. The bigger the deal, the more likely your VP, your CRO, CEO is going to want to double click on forecast category. So the further down the sort of value scale of a deal, the less likely somebody higher up is going to be checking on it. But I don't think we can decide who's responsible for inputting the data, which is the rep, and then overriding the data, which is the manager and VP. But ultimately, there is no one who is free from responsibility for this being accurate. But ultimately, if it's off, it's the rep you need to talk to.
Absolutely. I mean, I agree with you from an ownership of that field and who should be responsible for updating it. The VP of sales isn't in every one of those meetings. They might be CC'd on every one of those emails, but like there's nobody that knows that deal better from their subjective point of view than the rep who's working the deal or the account team if it's a team perspective of it. But it should very much be on the bottoms up scale of that. And I completely agree with you. It is the responsibility of the sales manager, the VP of sales, CEO, anywhere to respectfully challenge it. One of the things that we say all the time, like as we go through some of our forecast and pipeline meetings, we'll say, cool, you've got that in commit. That's great. Why isn't that closing? If you're that bullish on it, like, healthy friction and healthy challenging is a good thing. You got that forecasted to close next week. What's going to stop it from happening? Because that doesn't get asked too often. But yeah, I completely agree. Let the rep own it. It's everybody else's job to validate.
Absolutely. I completely agree. All right. So keeping us on track here, that was an interesting question. Thank you for dropping it in the Q&A, Jacob. Yeah. So let's talk about why, if my link will work. Not sure why. Brad, can you click the next slide on media? Doesn't seem to be working for me.
There you go. We got the tactical tips. It might have just jumped around on you. Are you trying to be at tactical tips?
I'm trying to be on why forecasting is difficult, but I still see accurate forecasting requires on the main screen.
I see why is forecasting difficult now. Technology.
I don't see it, but hopefully everybody else sees what I'm seeing. Okay, so let's talk about why forecasting is difficult. This is a really important thing to keep in mind as you're working through getting better at forecasting. So you need to do a few things right that we've already talked about, but let's talk about the common mistakes we see. So I've already sort of gotten on my soapbox about this, but confusing sales stage with forecast category. So I'm going to leave that one alone. Relying on rep opinions without validating what they're telling you. And then the next is trying to score opportunity health with only Salesforce data. So you can learn a lot about an opportunity's health with just Salesforce data, but you need that qualitative element. You need to blend in the art. There are times when the Salesforce data, for whatever reason, isn't trustworthy, and you need to back it up with real world data or qualitative analysis, I should say. And then this last one is the absolute biggest and the most important in my mind. Incentivizing having lots of pipeline instead of forecast accuracy. And there are a lot of reasons why reps feel strong incentives to keep tons of pipeline, but this is such a killer. This is the thing that I see most often making forecasting just impossible for ops teams and sales leadership. It's because reps, for whatever reason, and remember, people respond to incentives. So if they're doing it, there's an incentive, even if you don't see it. Why are they hoarding these dead deals? We'll talk about later. I call them marshmallows in their pipeline. You need to be able to answer that. And you need to dig deep and ask why that's happening.
Yeah. To a certain degree, we are all coin operated. So if you have the right incentive in place, like you will likely drive the right behavior. What I overall think of why forecasting is difficult? I'll start broad and then I'll kind of start at like the sort of the executive level. What's really difficult for all of us right now, and it's been this way probably for the last 2 years, the number of outside influence that we have no control over. And 2 years ago, year and a half ago, as we're still in it today, we have no control over a pandemic. Does that affect forecasting? Absolutely it does. We don't have any control over that. Do we have any control over inflation or interest rates rising or World War III looming? No, of course we don't. These are all things that impact us. So I always tell folks from a forecasting perspective, be aware of those, but don't let that overly overhaul or overdrive the way you think about your forecast. Don't think about it too positively. Don't think about it too negatively. Stay in the middle. Stay tempered. But you bring up a really good point on this is very tactical when it comes down to being very focused from an ops perspective. When you start hearing things like, oh, well, that stage is just a parking lot for a rep. It's kind of alive, but they still need like 2 more months to get budget. You start hearing those red flags, man, act quickly. When you hear the word, oh, well, that's an edge case. Like, is it an edge case? Because it's in your forecast and you've got a category or a forecast category already committed to it. Like, sure, it could be an edge case, but be very, very careful to hear those words and don't misrepresent them or let them go to the wayside. Like, that's when a good operations professional double clicks in and says, hey, wait a minute. I know you said it's a parking lot, but that's actually overinflating our entire pipeline. Like, I can't take that number to our board. They will crucify me because it looks like we have a massive amount of pipeline. And oh no, now I can't actually hit our number the right way. So just be wary of those little red flags that way.
All right. So for some reason we're seeing technical difficulties. Let's see if I can move us forward. Yeah, seems like in the chat everybody's still seeing the accurate forecasting requires. So apologies, everyone. We'll send out this deck after. We'll talk you through it. Nothing here is rocket surgery, so hopefully you're okay without. I can't stop sharing. So feel free to read this slide 1,000 times while we talk. So the next section is tactical tips for forecasting. So the first one we're going to get to here is start with process. And this is one of those things that's both super obvious, easy to say, and really hard to get right. So there are tons of tools out there that promise to fix forecasting. And they tell you install our tool and we'll essentially give you a crystal ball into what's coming in and what's not. And while some of these are really powerful and I find them personally very interesting, remember one thing: tools don't fix problems. So you cannot fix foundational issues by layering on another tool that adds information to a cluttered, untrustworthy set of fields that are associated with that triangle that we've talked about already: timeline, value, and probability.
Yeah, agreed. You and I've talked about this before. I think on a different webinar, one that we probably have with WizOps. You can't throw software at a problem. You very much identify your problem, understand. You don't have to understand how to fix it. We'll be very, very clear there. But if you can identify the problem first, figure out why it's a problem, then start to think about how you can actually potentially solve it with software. I know that sounds weird from a guy who sells software to, hey, don't always just go buy it. But I will be very empathetic here and be just very clear. As somebody who owns a software company, we sell a lot of software. I don't want people buying it if it's truly not solving a problem. It doesn't really help us as a business from a retention standpoint or really anything if it goes and sits on the shelf. And it happens too often. No company is immune to it or exempt from that. But just really, really focus on process first. Like you said, write it down. I know it sounds kind of cliche to say write it down, but when you're thinking about actually taking it to market and going to talk to some of these software vendors, say, here's my problem. I'm going to write it down, and we're going to look at this same Google Doc or the same piece of paper 365 days from now, and we're going to see if the problem got solved. Talk about like fixing a retention side of things. Like, be vocal, be happy about that. Like, what are we solving for? Hold us accountable from a software perspective to fix it. So, but yeah, process first, all day, every day.
So another even much more tactical tip. I want you as leaders, both sales leaders and ops leaders, to focus on accuracy over volume. And so I'll give you some specific examples of how you can do this. But in the slide that you can't see, it basically says that lots of pipeline feels good. I always think of that scene from Tommy Boy, if anyone remembers this, where he talks about guarantee on a box and how it makes you feel good. And I'll skip the part that I probably shouldn't say on a webinar, but it makes you feel good having lots of pipeline. And on top of that, reps are sometimes incentivized to carry lots of pipeline, and you feel like you have a path to your number when that happens. And so something I'd like to see, and I'm going to jump right to the next one and then hand it over to you, Brad, but something I like to see is a spiff that's a closest to the pin competition. And so this is something I did at PandaDoc, I did again at Smart Recruiters, and worked really, really well. And so the big bold thing in the middle of this slide says, in theory, a rep could come in dead last and win this competition. So do not conflate good performance against your quota with accuracy. And it's totally possible that somebody blows out their number and is the hero this quarter and gets shamed on your closest to the pin meeting at the end of the quarter. It is okay to think of these things totally differently. Just like forecast category and sales stage, do not conflate great performance against quota with being closest to the pin.
Couldn't agree more. I think the one thing that I look at and kind of put a lens on how do I articulate this sometimes to our board and to my bosses. I've seen this happen in previous lives too. When you have too much of that volume and accuracy is not there, trust me, board members are looking at pipeline coverage. There's a whole methodology there when you want to think 3x, 4x, 5x pipeline coverage quarter over quarter to go hit your goal. That's great. Where you look really bad as an executive or as a leader, walk into that board meeting when you didn't hit your number. And I'll make up a kind of fairy tale example here. Let's say that you had last quarter, you had to go hit $1 million in new bookings, and you fell short, $750K, so you hit 75% of it. When you go through a board meeting, you're talking about this, like one of the first things, if you have a good, smart board member, like the ones we have, like, cool, what was your pipeline coverage for last quarter? Like, well, if I look at my report, looks like we had 20 million in pipeline. You want to quickly figure out how to field a very hard question from your boss. You're telling me that you had 20 million in pipeline over there and you could only close 750K. What's going on? Oh, well, some of that pipeline was inflated. Like they should have lost that, but they didn't. That is why it's important. Like you want to tell a true and accurate story. Yes, you want the hockey stick and you want the up and to the right pretty bar graph or line graph that you create, but it has to be rooted in some fact. And when you have an overinflated pipeline, you're not going to operate the business the right way either. You're going to overhire likely. You're like, hey, we need new reps. Like we have such a big pipeline. Not enough people talk to them. Accuracy, 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 way over volume. Full stop.
Yeah, absolutely. 100% agree with that. And there's no worse feeling, as maybe some people watching right now know, no worse feeling than having to explain to a board or your VP of sales or whomever why you missed by a huge margin. And something we talk about a lot at Iceberg that is becoming sort of core to our philosophy, because we have this concept of DRI, directly responsible individual, who every client is assigned one. And you can delegate tasks, you cannot delegate responsibility. And so something to remember as you think about forecasting, you think about building this. If you're the leader of ops, if you're the sales leader, you're on the hook, and there's no worse feeling. That feeling in the pit of your stomach when you know you're about to walk into a meeting where somebody's going to ask you a very simple question you just can't answer. And so this framework is how you don't have that feeling anymore. And so I want to move on to the next thing. This is a blend of tactical and strategic, but a really important thing to keep top of mind. An up or out mentality in sales generally, but specifically in forecasting. And this is something that if you're in ops, you should be forcing. And if you're a sales leader, you should require. And so I would say up or out mentality is next to the sort of system stuff, the most important piece of getting forecasting right. So something in the slide that you can't see is what Brad said earlier, which is, do you have an opportunity object or a stage in your opportunities that is a parking lot? And be honest about that, do you? Because most companies do. And so opportunities, especially the ones that qualify as pipeline, must be held to an upper out standard if you want to get forecasting right. Anything else will make accurate, and when I say accurate, I actually mean trustworthy, forecasting completely wrong, because all forecasting is accurate. The system is giving you the distillation of those three fields. Trustworthy is what's really hard to nail. And so every pipeline review, and sometimes ops owns this, sometimes sales owns it. I think ops should be responsible for surfacing to sales what they need to have these good reviews. But you should be asking questions like, why shouldn't I close this deal today? It's lost. I actually, with sales reps, often start the conversation with, great, I'm closing this op. Prove me wrong. Tell me why I shouldn't. And often if they can't answer the question, my response is, great, close it out. You can open it up when you have a real deal again. And what are their other options? Are there things that you're not considering as good second or maybe first options? Maybe you're really the second option for this buyer. Have you really dug into that? Upper out mentality requires you to ask these tough questions. And why do they need what we're selling? Do they need what we're selling? Do they? And the discipline to poke at that and be honest about it is part of this upper out mentality.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think the things you always have to be very disciplined there is making sure as you're having these healthy conversations, you're doing your pipeline review, you're doing your forecasting review, you want to make sure you're challenging the right way. Like, hey, again, ask those questions. Why shouldn't I close this deal today? What are the other options? Why don't we do this? But as a leader, especially, or the ops person, whoever's running and owning that meeting, say, cool, I hear you. I see that you got that in that parking lot stage that we don't like. You've got, be graceful. This time next week when we have this forecasting meeting, that is either up or out. It's either into a new stage or it's not on this screen. Are we good there? You have a week to get kind of the ducks in a row. That's healthy friction. Everybody should be allowed to challenge that way.
100%. I absolutely agree. So there are a couple more slides that speak to the up or out, and I'm going to sort of breeze through these and then pause and give it back to you, Brad. But yeah, if you want an easy way to spot opportunities that are stalled, which means they don't fit in the up category, therefore you need to move them out. There's some stuff that I like to do in Salesforce. So this is getting into the really tactical nitty gritty, but there's some of this coming that I think will be helpful for folks. The first is you can create a few fields to feed into your reporting that actually help surface the ops that actually should belong in the out category. One I like to do is last rep activity. Mm-hmm. So last rep activity, and this is different than last activity field. In my mind, the last activity field in Salesforce is basically useless today because Salesforce is the source of truth for all activity. That means marketing activity. That means SDR activity. That means lots and lots of things that can show up as emails in your activity feed that update last activity. Therefore, you can have a sales rep who hasn't touched an opportunity in a month, but the last activity is yesterday and it looks safe. And so I like building a roll-up or an automation. There are a couple different paths to get here that surfaces when is the last time the sales rep who owns this opportunity had some interaction with this prospect or client. If you're in CS, same thing applies. And if you want to get fancy with it, then find ways to filter for responses to outgoing emails so that a rep can't have somebody in an outreach sequence sending emails while they sleep that stays off of your radar because the last rep activity is always a couple days ago, even though nobody has talked to this person in months. Another thing I love to do, it's really simple, quick and easy, and absolutely eye-opening, is count the number of times that your close date has moved. As a general rule, like it's going to move here and there, but especially the combination of a close date that has moved and is far from now is maybe a sign that you need to double click on that op. It doesn't mean it's dead, but as a sales leader or an ops leader, you should be paying attention to it. and then time and stage. And a little later in this presentation, we're going to get to how to record when opportunities enter certain stages so that you can date stamp the movement of opportunities really easily. And that allows you to do formula fields that say, like, today minus the current stage time in, or date in rather. And so you can count the number of days each opportunity has been in its current stage. So imagine things like, it's been in the same stage for a long time. Enter each stage, and R1, what's the average amount of time they spend in this stage? And you can do some really interesting math here to start to surface pretty easily. A good Salesforce admin can build this for you in a day, and you can start to surface in a dashboard, well, how many ops do I have that meet these criteria that make me think they're a marshmallow? And so, yeah, it's as simple as last rep activity, counting the close date changes, and monitoring the time and stage, and then building some filters that surface the things that are on the wrong side of each of these metrics. And then the last one, before I promise I'll be quiet and hand it over to Brad. Some of you are probably thinking, sales reps, sales leaders, you might be thinking, well, I need to keep this open because I'm still working the account, or I can't close it if, they're not interested right now, but I think, they said they're going to budget for it in 6 months or whatever. And this is how parking lots happen. And so fundamentally, you need to change your mentality if you allow this to opportunities are a way to memorialize deals that are happening right now. They are accelerating deals happening right now, not deals that might happen soon, not deals that are stuck but might become unstuck soon. They are deals happening right now. And this goes back to the open opportunities make reps feel warm and fuzzy inside, and cold, long dead ops can make you feel like there's a chance. And so it's your job as a sales leader, and often as an ops leader, to arm your sales leaders with the info necessary to go have these conversations, strictly define standards for what an opportunity is, and find ways to filter ops that don't actually meet those standards. Hold reps accountable to the standard. I literally stole from one of my reps a year ago the word marshmallows, and I love it. And it's like, it's a little shameful when I ask a sales rep, like, is this a marshmallow? You got a marshmallow in my pipeline? Is that what's happening here? It's sort of a running joke, but nobody wants to hear the word marshmallow in a pipeline review. And then you need to provide an alternative mechanism for working opportunities after they're closed. So there is the Salesforce record, the object called opportunity, which should not exist, even when sometimes there's a future opportunity out there, opportunity meaning just like the plain English word opportunity. So a pro tip, find a way to use the account for this. Find a way, and this is a whole nother webinar, but you can nurture these companies from the account level. You do not need an opportunity to keep a company warm and keep talking to them and not lose sight of a possibility of selling to them. So I'm here, and Brad, I'm dying to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, well, I look at so much of this too as a function of how you set up the right expectations. We talked about how to incentivize the right behavior. There are so many, especially what you just said, there's so many mechanisms of how to keep people accountable. 2 ways to get people to do things. You can either positively motivate or negatively reinforce. You very much want to do the former, not the latter, as much as you can. Negative reinforcement sometimes doesn't always go that well. But the one thing, especially on the pipeline side that you were talking about, and I'll just add some subjective color to it. As Taff, you and I both, we buy a lot of software. We have to enable our team to do the right things. Sometimes things happen where we can't buy it in the same quarter that, of course, the sales rep wants to do. But so I'm victim of this, or I'm guilty of this, where I've been sort of that laggard, like, yep, I promise we're interested. I can't do it this month. We potentially do it next, or next quarter or next year. But that the sales rep that holds on to that for too long, where it gets really tough on the receiving end of that, is getting that email like once a month, like, hey, Brad, how's the weather in Atlanta? Hope you're doing well. Want to surface this one back up. Like, those emails from the sales side don't always help that often. They can sometimes get to be a little bothersome at times. And so I always tell folks, man, like, if you have a badass marketing team, let them do their job. They will nurture it the right way. They will make sure that potential prospect is still getting the right information and we're still staying top of mind to them. And I'll be honest, like, there's times I don't really want to answer the how's the weather or hey, the Braves won the World Series. I'd much rather get a product update email that says like, hey, we're doing these new features now. Like this could probably be relevant to you. So keep that subject matter there, keep it tight. But just remember we're humans on the other end of those emails when you're checking in with folks and you're kicking things down the road for a next quarter. Be real with yourself. Again, don't inflate the pipeline, obviously, but same thing, up or out, like keep it moving. So.
Absolutely. That's 100% spot on. And so the next sort of tactical thing I want to touch on is really simple, a clean your room dashboard. And so this is something a term I stole from one of the sales leaders I used to work for who came from Salesforce, where I think is where he got that terminology. But if you should be able to define what is not allowed. So if you can define, then you can filter for. So things like some examples are ops beyond stage 2 with no value put in yet, ops with close dates in the past, ops not in stage X with a close date within the next few days, things like that. Ops with no rep activity within the past X days. These are all things that you should sit down and think about. Anytime you go correct a rep when it comes to data entry, you should be writing this stuff down and looking for patterns and then build reports in a clean your room dashboard to surface this stuff. And a little anecdote, when I worked for Smart Recruiters, I ran sales ops and sales development there. And I had a hell of a time getting these senior, experienced enterprise sales reps to do anything I asked them to do. Even though we all knew that this stuff is important, it didn't move the needle for them day to day. And they were older, more experienced, more confident than me. And I just couldn't move the needle. And so I created a clean your room dashboard. I added it into our rotation of ambition screens, ambition being the app that you can put a presentation up on TVs throughout the office that shows, usually you use it for positive stuff. So-and-so's on the, here's the leaderboard for SDRs. So-and-so just hit, 10 meetings this month. Yay. But you can also put a clean your room dashboard on there and have a worst offenders list. And so I installed one right above the CEO's desk where the CEO and CMO and a couple other leaders could see it and watch it all day long, and one over the sales floor. And it took about 24 hours for that to get to 0. Things I had spent months and months and months fighting for. So remember that sunlight is a great disinfectant. So make this visible to the entire org. And if you can report on it, which you should be able to, if you can't report on it, that's a whole nother issue. You need to better define what is required. But if you can report on it, throw it in a clean your room dashboard and it will change behavior quickly.
Absolutely. Look, people will hear it and sometimes they'll say, man, I can't believe you're going to publicly shame somebody. No. There's no public shaming. Look, we all have jobs to do. If anything, it validates how hard your job is. Look, juggling a big pipeline's tough. Closing deals is tough. Sales is tough. Success is tough. Marketing stuff, it's all tough. When you talk about those dashboards, we actually take it to a little bit of a more global extreme. At Sonar, every department has a dashboard, whether it's here in the office on a TV like it is behind me, or if it's something that we have publicly shared for all the links that we send out our weekly email at the end of the week. Hey, check how the customer success team's doing. Check out their dashboard and their progress. So it extends a little bit past forecasting as well, but that public transparency helps hold accountability. The same way nobody wants to be on that bottom of the activity levels. Like if you're an SDR and you're not making enough phone calls or emails, like you don't want to be at the bottom of that. The same way the person with the overinflated pipeline that hasn't cleaned their room lately doesn't want to be on there. And it doesn't matter if you're the best sales rep or not. You don't get a hall pass for it. I think that's the leadership side of it. Don't give hall passes out. Like, oh yeah, Jim, I know he's got a terribly messy room, but he's a top rep. Like, no, like hold Jim accountable.
100%. Nobody should be above reproach if they're not following the rules. And also, that's why you should be very careful about which rules you set and only set ones you're willing to enforce, which is the other side of that coin. Don't make it too cumbersome to be a rep. And that's why that triangle is so nice. Keep it simple.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to round us out. The last couple slides here are basically sharing a little bit of the secret sauce at Iceberg. So some context here is anytime we take on a new client who we're working on anything related to sales ops with, there are some things we do. There are some things we put in place that help with forecasting and also just analyzing how opportunities move through pipeline. And this is a simple thing you can go build. A decent Salesforce admin can put this together for you in a day. So we add a couple new fields into every, actually, let me start with, we make sure all sales stages are numbered. And this is important because as you grow and as you build automations, instead of saying, if stage name equals negotiate, you can say if stage contains the number 4. So 4-negotiate instead of negotiate. What that means is you can change stage names without breaking every automation in your whole system as long as you keep them numbered. It means that there's no accidentally misspelling a stage name and having your automations break. There's a lot of benefit to having everything numbered. And then we create 2 new fields for every sales stage. Stage X in date, so stage 1 in date, stage 2 in date, and then stage X in value. So stage 1 in value, and whatever that North Star metric is, let's say it's ARR. If you're a SaaS company, then whatever the ARR is when it enters that stage gets stamped in this field. This lets you do 2 really important things. The first is it lets you understand how long everything has been in whatever stage it's in, and gives you tons of ability to analyze, how long on average does an opportunity live in stage 3? Is there a difference in likelihood of a stage 3 op to be won or lost based on how many days it stays in stage 3? And this can be super eye-opening once you start getting some data flowing into this. And then we build some automation. We usually use a single flow to fill all of these in. And this lets you create win rates by stage, which is super important. This is another element of forecasting that's like getting down into the particulars, but is really important. If you have an understanding of win rate by stage, you can start to set up probability by stage to be more and more accurate. And so this doesn't mean it can't be overridden. This doesn't mean a rep can't put their subjective analysis in play via forecast categories. But what it does mean is you're much more likely to hit the nail on the head if you use that instead of the out of the box. Stage 1, 10%, stage 2, 20%, stage 3, 50% likelihood to be won. This actually lets you answer the question, like, over time, how likely is a stage 4 opportunity to be won? And then that percentage is applied to amounts, which lets you forecast much more accurately than otherwise. Brad, I can't tell if you're frozen.
Hope I'm not. Hope I'm here.
Oh, good. Okay, I hear you now.
Nope, I'm here. I will tell you this. I don't. Maybe I'm the oddball in the room, or probably one of the odd CEOs who's so tactically driven, and probably because of my ops background. But things like this, part of the secret recipe, are so important. We use this all the time because all this is doing is creating trends for you. And if you want to see a trend analysis, this is exactly how to do it. Because once you find something trending, then you know how to optimize for it. Like, hey, things are getting stuck over there in stage 3. Next quarter, that's our biggest focus. How do we optimize the efficiency and the speed and pace for stage 3 conversion to stage 4? But you don't get that unless you take very, very tactical measures like this to make sure that you are actually tracking it the right way. You know how it's coming in and out. Then you get to start putting some of the subjective flavor to it. So but you don't get to do any of that without having the right proper foundation and architecture like this to be set up the right way.
Absolutely. Totally agree. And that's why we're on the same wavelength. It's I like the degree to which you lean on tech and use it without nerding out and doing unnecessary stuff. So I think that's awesome. I'm going to round us out with one last tactical tip. I don't see any Q&A, so I'll go ahead and burn the rest of our time here. So stage in value, one of the fields we always add for each stage. There's a reason this is so important. And when a stage in value is captured, what it does is over time helps you get a clear understanding of how the values of your opportunities change stage over stage. Because one reason that your forecasts can be wildly off, even though most of the data is pretty good, is because opportunities tend to shrink. SDRs are usually super optimistic. AEs tend to be really optimistic early in a deal and become more and more realistic as the deal goes by. So you've probably seen $100,000 opportunities that end up being sold for $30,000. And what you forget is that when it's $100,000, that's factoring into your forecast. So knowing what to discount or where to coach is a really valuable thing. And you get that by capturing the value every time an opportunity enters a stage, instead of just trying to remember which one shrunk, which didn't, and which reps are most likely to be overly optimistic. So with that, I think we've got about 10 seconds left. Brad, anything you want to say before we go?
I would just double down that same part of that of like double clicking into it, the stage value. This also serves a really good opportunity for you to coach folks on discounting of how your evolution of it goes. So if you're going from 100K to 30K consistently, let's coach through that. So look at it as a coaching opportunity as well.
Awesome. All right. I think that's our time. Brad, thank you so much.
Dude, Taft, it's always good jamming with you, man. We'll do it more often. Thanks for having me on.
All right.
All right.